Was that 1 minute or go? Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Kim Dorman, and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. I'm delighted to welcome you here, making your way through the cold to the library for this wonderful Sustainable Princeton event. We always love to partner with Sustainable Princeton. They do such great work, and they do wonderful things on the internet. I don't know if you saw their thankful video on LinkedIn where they gave a brief summary of what you're going to hear about tonight, but I just wanted to give some housekeeping notes before I introduce Alexandra. We do have a T-coil-enabled system in this room, so if you'd like to switch on a T-coil, if you have a T-coil-enabled device and you'd like to switch it on at this time, please do. We also have headsets on the piano if you'd like to use one of the headsets. We'd also ask that you turn off or silence any of electronic devices that you've brought with you at this time. It's my great pleasure to introduce Alexandra Dill, who I'm going to say is the Program Manager of Sustainable Princeton. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, my name's Alex. I'm a Program Manager at Sustainable Princeton. Thank you all for coming to this event. Thanks to the library for hosting us and partnering with us on this event. Thanks to our generous sponsors at NRG, and of course to our speakers. Let's see. I'm just gonna repeat those housekeeping. So those who are online, our virtual participants can send their questions to info@sustainableprinceton.org, and we'll get your questions answered during the Q&A portion of this session. And for those who are in person, just make sure you silence your phones and ask any questions you have into the microphone. I just want to start with a little bit of background on Sustainable Princeton. So we are a local nonprofit that works with residents, businesses, the municipality, and schools to reduce greenhouse gas emission, enhance community resiliency against climate change, and to protect the local ecosystem. The mission of our nonprofit is to inspire our community to develop and implement solutions that positively impact the environment. And one of the ways we do this is with our Climate Action Plan, which was developed in 2019 with many community members. And this Climate Action Plan provides a roadmap to reduce Princeton's contribution to climate change. It provides an ambitious path to reduce emissions at 50% from 2010 levels by 2030, 65% by 2040, and 80% by 2050. One of the ways we expect to meet this goal is with our energy section in the Climate Action Plan. So the vision for this section is that all Princeton community members efficiently use clean, reliable, and affordable energy. So tonight we'll have the opportunity to learn how we can make this vision a reality. We will learn how this clean energy transition can also be affordable, which is important to our low-income residents in Princeton, as 21% of their household income is spent on energy bills. So tonight we'll hear from Veronique Oomen, who is the Director of Clean Energy at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And we'll also hear from Abraham Silverman, who is a principal at Silver Green Energy Consulting and research scholar at the Johns Hopkins University. But before I hand things over to them, I just want to say that the cleanest energy is the energy that is not used. So you could head to the back of the room to learn more about energy efficiency programs, bike safety, all of our upcoming programs and events. You could also scan this QR code to learn more and sign up for our newsletter. And now I'm gonna,
I would just like to invite everybody to take seats. Oh, there's a break. Have any more seats to put out. So if you'd like seats, we have a bunch in the front. If you have a seat next to you that's available, would you raise your hand, please?
all right, no, you're good. And I'll hand things over to Abe.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. It's great to see such an audience. This is very exciting. So my name is Abe Silverman. As was mentioned, I am a research scholar at Johns Hopkins University. I see a lot of great friends here in the audience, and so this will be very exciting. So my journey into clean energy actually sort of got an accidental start about 20 years ago when I went to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I was fresh out of law school, and I told folks I wanted to work in clean energy, and they took a look at me, and they said, "You have no idea what we do here, do you? We're an economic regulator. We care about prices and market efficiency." And I was like, that sounds great too. So I ended up going to work in the Office of Markets, Tariffs, and Rates, and really started working there for about 4 years, worked at a law firm for a few years, and then actually moved up here where I recognize many friends from there, at NRG Energy, which is one of the sponsors tonight. So I was there for a few years, and then I jumped ship and went to work for the state of New Jersey, really because I started seeing this need for us to all take this little climate change thing seriously, and yet to do it in a way that's sort of joyful and happy and doesn't make you so depressed that you just want to crawl under the covers. And I know there's a lot of that these days. And so one of the things that I've been doing since working with the state is going around and helping states and municipalities and everyone else come up with actionable plans for implementing clean energy solutions. Don't just sit there and get depressed, let's do something about it, right? And so one of the things, I think you'll see during our intro there is Sustainable Princeton has a roadmap. What's a roadmap? A roadmap is just a plan to get us to meet our own carbon targets. And there's national roadmaps, there's of course international roadmaps, there's state roadmaps, and I firmly believe that we should all have our own personal roadmaps as well. And so one of the things that I'm very excited to be here tonight is to be here with Veronique, who is really in charge of building all the clean energy and dispersing all the money that you may want for rooftop solar, for community solar, for energy efficiency, for offshore wind and everything else. And then I recognize many of my former state colleagues here as well who are also doing that great work. So let me just orient ourselves real quick. Of course, we're in New Jersey, and it's good to know where are the carbon emissions coming from in New Jersey. Transportation being number one, residential and commercial, electric generation, industrial, and then there's natural gas transmission and distribution and a few other things. And of course, that wonderful, beautiful green bar down at the bottom, that's our trees and forests. So it's a negative carbon sink. So really, this is where it's coming from. And I bet for most of us in the room, our carbon footprint is probably really concentrated in that first and second and third bars. So I just thought this was an interesting chart. This is from our colleagues at the State Department. Gosh, I've been gone too long. This is from the state EPA. And you can see here, this is, and I'm really going to point you over to the one, especially over here, which I thought was the most interesting. So this is emissions per person. And you can see it's been going down a little bit, but pretty much staying the same. New Jersey's a lot more efficient than most of the rest of the country. And why is that? Because we're such a densely populated state, I think, is probably the answer. But you can see, this is where we are, and then you can see the rest of the world using about half, emitting about half the carbon that we emit here per person, and about a quarter of the average American. So I know there's a lot of numbers there, but I just found that was kind of interesting. So here is the national picture for GHG emissions. So a lot of this, we talk about what were we emitting in 2005, what are we emitting today, and what's the trajectory we need to get down to zero in 2050. And you can see, we are on a roller coaster ride. And like most roller coasters, this is going to be an exciting transition and not one without bumps and twists and turns. So one of the things that's very exciting as we think about the new Harris administration. Okay, hold on. This is the elephant in the room. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking people off the ledge these days. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's a couple different things to think about. One is so much of energy policy is actually driven by states and by consumers. And you know what? They can't take that away from us. So as we think about the next 4 years, we need to sit back and reevaluate. But we also need to make sure that we continue to have a positive energy agenda for the next 4 years and not just find ourselves responding to the random number generator that we're going to get out of Washington, D.C. And so, it is difficult. But we also need to talk about how do we talk about energy. And one of the really interesting things about energy is for the first 15 years of my career, energy was, I won't say it was bipartisan, but it was pretty bipartisan. There were geographic splits, there were differences of opinion, but there was a fundamental, sense that good energy policy was good American policy. And one of the things that I really try to do is we need to make energy boring again. And so I spend a lot of time talking about how do we, and I'm a proud blue state resident, you can tell where my politics are, but how do we work with our colleagues in red states to drive good energy policy? And there are a lot of places where I think there actually is common ground. American energy abundance. I'm for that. I believe in that. That's great. Lower cost energy. I'm definitely for that. How about improving the reliability of the grid, reducing the number of blackouts, making our grid secure against both extreme weather and terrorist events? I'm for that too. And how can we, increasingly, energy is about economic development as well, because so many of the new industries in the United States are such heavy users of electricity. Advanced manufacturing, batteries, certainly data centers, all the things that we sort of see coming in the industrial revitalization driven by the Biden administration, these are places where energy is absolutely key. And that affects red states and blue states, and so I hope we can find at least some common ground, even if we don't necessarily agree on the importance of fighting climate change. I always look around and say, is what I'm saying, could it end up in a Joe Manchin press release? And a lot of these ideas can, and you can see here on the left, Senator Manchin, he's about to leave, but hopefully before he does, they will push through a siting and permitting bill reform bill, because that is one of the most important things that we can do to get energy deployed in this country. So, rather than drill, baby, drill, it should be build, baby, build, because we do have a lot of need for energy infrastructure in this country if we are going to decarbonize and if we're going to drive the kind of economic agenda that I think a lot of us see coming in this very high load growth scenario where people are using more and more electricity. This is by that gentleman right there in the second row, who I'm sure will ask some ringer questions. But we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we pitch a positive pro-transmission, pro-clean energy agenda in a way that builds coalitions as much as we possibly can. So I don't want to lose sight of the good news. Good news number one is that state policies are powerful. Lighter colors on this map are good because they're states that invested in their transmission grid, which is absolutely critical to decarbonization. One of the things that's sort of intuitive when you think about it, but weather is different across the country. And so one of the things you need in a high renewable penetration grid is you need transmission lines to take power from where it's sunny to where it's not sunny on any given day. Building out that transmission grid is good for that. It's also absolutely critical if we're going to electrify buildings and electrify our transportation system, both of which are critical to solving long-term climate change. And I love this map because you can see, look at California out there, bright yellow. They've done good. But who else has done good is Texas. Noted liberal squish, state. And they have also invested in their transmission grid and as a result have some of the highest renewable, and in fact, I believe it is the highest renewable penetration state in the country. And you can see, different states on here have different colors, and it is largely driven by concerted action at the state level to actually get infrastructure built. So good news number two, oops, sorry, the heading didn't show up there, but this is good news number two is gosh, clean energy is really getting deployed pretty fast. And you know why? Because it's cheap. In a lot of cases, it's cheaper than fossil. But you can't get too carried away with that, because there is not always cheaper than fossil. And in places like New Jersey with high land costs and relatively high prices, it's not cheaper for the most part. So we need to think about how are we valuing the climate in making our energy decisions. But yeah, still, this is really good news. This is actual deployed power. And you can see we are seeing tremendous growth in solar and wind, even over some very challenging circumstances over the last few years with COVID and inflation and everything else. There's also some less good news. One is that we as a country are using a lot more electricity than we have historically. And a big piece of this is actually going to data centers. Hyperscale data centers, AI-enabled data centers. I mean, it is such a talking point these days, but when you actually look, so this is data from our regional grid operator, comprises 13 states plus the District of Columbia, called PJM. Originally stood for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland. Now it's a much larger regional grid. Regional grids are great because we get to share resources with our neighbors, so that part is very good. But what you see here is the black line at the bottom is the amount of load growth that they saw last year. And the light blue line is what they see this year. And I really do feel, acronyms are often the greatest threat to the clean energy transition. So I'm always reluctant to use acronyms. And numbers aren't far behind. But you can see, the y-axis here is in 10,000 megawatts. So that is 10 nuclear plants, or 1,000 solar farms, or 10 new offshore wind farms, for every 10,000 there. And yet you're seeing by the early 2030s, we're looking at 50,000 megawatts of new load. That is incredible. And, and the bad news number two, I'm sorry to say, is that we are not building new clean energy fast enough. We are not getting it out there on the grid. And Veronique and I worked, and many others, Phil and others in the room, have worked incredibly hard to get stuff deployed. And yet at the end of the day, our regulatory processes are not sufficient to match the throughput of new clean energy deployment that we need. Now, there's good news there too, because there's a lot of demand. We actually have, one of my favorite statistics, enough generation that has submitted an application to come onto the grid to replace every generator in the United States twice over. And yet we can't get it built because we can't get it deployed, we can't get it through fast enough. For those of you who are interested, the interconnection queue is a favorite topic. I know there's at least a few victims of the interconnection queue here in the room. But it really is this line that you have to get in before you can hook up to the grid. And so if we put a plan in today to build a new, say, solar generator, you are looking at, and again, I apologize, I know the y-axis is a little bit small here, but an average of 60 months just to get studied and approved to build. That's on top of your siting, your permitting, your supply chain, and everything else. And then the other big threat, I hate to say it, is NIMBYism. I love infrastructure. I really want to have a button made up that says, I love infrastructure. I hope all you do too. And it's painful, but sometimes that infrastructure is going to be in a place where you don't want to see it. And yet I think we as a society really have to get comfortable that we need to push the infrastructure forward. And in some cases, we need to push the infrastructure over people's objections. Whether it's deeply felt belief that you shouldn't spoil a view, or because they're astroturfing for a fossil fuel interest, or they're just contrarian, people show up to meetings and say, don't put that there. And we need to be, politely say, no, actually it needs to go there. And if we can't put it there, we need to put it somewhere else. And you can't just say, put it over in the poor community, because that's just like the wrong answer. Sorry, so a couple of my headings got lost here, but that's okay. But this slide is talking, I'm going to switch a little bit, because the other great threat to the clean energy transition is affordability. Alex talked about this and talked about energy poverty. This is a real thing in America. It's a real thing in Princeton, it's a real thing everywhere. And one of the things that I always try to, help people understand is we as a society have set up an energy grid that is largely revenue neutral, and it is funded by customers. Every penny that we spend on clean energy, on the grid, on electricity, is funded by the ratepayers. Sure, there's some federal tax dollars, which, knock on wood, those will continue. I may enlist you all to make phone calls if things go in another direction down to DC and convince people that tax credits are worth fighting for. But for the most part, other than that injection of federal money, every penny we spend is collected from somebody. It's either from someone in this room or someone down the road. So costs really do matter. And so we need to do this decarbonization thing at a price that consumers can afford. And it's a little bit scary. So I know there's a lot of numbers on here. One of the things we all pay for is something called capacity. This is power plants sitting ready to produce when we need them. And this is for PJM. So in 2023, 2024, why 2 years? Because the energy year starts in June 1st and ends in May 31st, another way in which this stuff is very confusing. But I'm just gonna say, for 2023, the total cost for this service was $2.2 billion. Same in 2024. 2025, it jumped sevenfold to $14 billion. That means that on June 1st, 2025, all of us in this room are going to get a major price increase in our electric bill. And that's before we have deployed 1 megawatt of clean power. This is just because we're using more electricity. The supply of new generation is constrained because of all those interconnection queue and other siting and permitting issues. And so as a result, prices are going up. I also want to talk about this slide. Now, again, this is one that has a lot of numbers, but it's really important. The colors, the green at the top represents low-income customers. And the light blue at the bottom is relatively wealthy customers making over $150,000, households making over $150,000 a year. So what is this showing? This is showing the temperature at which people turn on their air conditioning. This was from Illinois, taken from actual smart meter data. And what you see is that rich people keep their houses at a lovely 62.5 degrees during the summer, and poor people don't. They have a much higher temperature. Now, 60 to 70 degrees doesn't really feel like it's that big a deal, but this is average. So that means that poor customers are letting temperatures get much, much higher in their houses before they turn on their air conditioning. So this is a real consequence of energy poverty and something that we all need to work very hard on, because I would hate to see the clean energy transition founder because we're imposing costs that are simply unaffordable on low-income customers. And that means we need to think really hard about how we are doing this transition, particularly as we start coming over and talking about phasing out natural gas and moving to heat pumps, all wonderful things to do, but the costs are really high. So we need to spend a lot of time figuring out how we're going to manage that transition. This is another one of my favorite slides from back my time at BPU. So this is looking at what electricity and natural gas prices are going to be on a per customer basis in 2030. So on the left is your status quo 2020 customer. That's what you're paying today, or at least it was in 2020 when this was made. Customer number one is somebody who doesn't do anything to their energy mix. So they're going to continue to burn natural gas for their house heating. They're not going to invest in making your house more energy efficient, and they're going to continue driving an internal combustion energy vehicle. And then you start seeing that if you have capital to deploy and you're willing to invest in energy efficiency, okay, then you're in that second bunch. Your rates are still going up, your total bill is still going up over the next 10 years, but it's manageable. The third customer who's actually converting to an EV is saving money on energy. They're actually paying less total dollars in 2030 than they are in 2020. And then for that last customer that is doing both electric heating, energy efficiency, and electric vehicles, they're actually saving money. And of course, who's going to end up in category 4 where we all want to be? Relatively well-off folks who own their own home, who have access to capital to buy an EV or capital to deploy energy efficiency and electric heating. And then we really have to worry about who's in category one. Sure, maybe it's just someone being lazy who doesn't want to deal with all these things, but most likely that's a renter, a low-income customer, and this represents a real problem for us, and we need to think about how to fix those problems. So I'll just end on this. So this is what a lot of us in New Jersey sat down and came up with. There's an energy master plan that last was updated in 2020. It's being updated again, so we don't have the new numbers yet. We're very excited to see that. But you can see here's what we were projecting would happen over the next, 30 years. So nuclear remains a big part of our energy mix. Fossil gas for electricity generation slowly gets phased out, down to zero. Solar grows quite a bit, that's the green bar. Offshore wind starts kicking in, that's the dark blue. And then the rest of it is clean energy from other parts of the grid outside of New Jersey. And so we really have an all of the above energy mix. So I'm really excited to get to questions. Well, I think we're going to hear from Veronique first, and then we'll actually take questions. But I'm really excited to take your questions. We'll talk about this stuff, and very interested to hear what folks have to say. I'll turn it over to Veronique.
Good evening, everybody. Great to see you all. So I'm totally with Abe on the affordability, and actually I'm going to put in a plug for the board's of energy assistance programs, because nobody in New Jersey who are making less than a certain amount, I think it's $55,000, needs to pay more than 4% of their income on electricity and gas combined. And there's assistance programs out there to help you with that. So if you need assistance, please do look for it, because it is available in New Jersey. So my name is Veronique Oomen. I have been with the Board of Public Utilities for almost 4 years now. And my journey started in rowing. And I actually have one of my rowing friends here, because my previous boss, whose job I now have taken, I used to row with me, and we used to talk on our walks from the rowing club to the parking lot about clean energy. And I said, hey, gee, that's nice. That's a very interesting topic. Maybe I should get involved in that as well. So he convinced me to join the BPU, and the rest is history. We have a number of goals in New Jersey to achieve clean energy, and they're set through a wide variety of mechanisms. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but what is important here is that there's a combination of legislation, there's executive orders, there's rules, and then there's the Energy Master Plan that all have different levels of protection versus the political environments we're in. So when something is encoded in law, it is pretty set, and there has to be another legal change, a legislative change, before we can make a change to the goal. But a lot of these are not, and so we are somewhat vulnerable to changes in the administration on that side. What we do, we regulate the utilities. That is the job of the Board of Public Utilities. But, and this is actually different from most states, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities is also the state energy office. In most states, those two functions are separate. So we do not only do the regulation, we also do the policy and the implementation of the state's goals on energy. And for that, to that extent, we have a number of tools at our disposal to affect clean energy. There's the utility regulation, and that includes things like utility programs on energy efficiency, on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We also have a renewable portfolio standard that compels all the generators to buy renewable energy credits for a certain percentage of their retail sales, so that you can truly claim that a percentage of your electricity is being produced with clean energy. And then we have incentive programs. So in short, the BPU channels most of the money in the state for the implementation of the clean energy transition, with the express goal of market transformation. So we don't do this so we can keep shoveling money out the door as much as we can. We do this so that there is a sustainable system being created that can produce energy at a affordable rate that is clean for all the people in New Jersey. So they asked me to talk a little bit about the benefits of the energy transition. You all know this, right? But what I want to stress here is that it's not a binary. Climate change is not, when we reach the 1.5 centigrade threshold, all of a sudden the lights go out and everybody dies. No, it's going to be, it's a much more grayscale of options, and every bit of carbon that we can reduce counts. If we can reduce a ton today, carrying over into the future, that counts. And we all work towards that goal of reducing as much as possible. Also, in New Jersey, alone, there's about 1,200 people dying prematurely from air pollution. So it's not just about climate change. And those people predominantly live in the low-income communities. And then, of course, there's health effects, asthma, stroke, every conceivable form of cancer. It's all made worse by air pollution. Now, what Abe already said, and if there's one thing I want you to remember from today, is this: we need new generation. The prices of electricity are going up, not because we're spending so much money on clean energy, but because we don't have enough energy, and in a market where supply and demand work, then without enough supply, the prices are going up. And that's what we're seeing right now. So what we do have a choice as a state, as a broader community, what type of energy, what type of new generation do we want? And the state of New Jersey at this point firmly wants to invest in those new resources being clean. And of course, a lot of that provides economic opportunities. We have over 7,000 people working in solar in the state. Phil, you probably know how many people we have working in energy efficiency. Around 30,000 people, yeah. So that's a lot of people working towards a energy transition. So where are we now? We have almost 200,000 EVs, probably a little bit less than that on the road today. And that number is still growing fairly rapidly. It's not, if people are talking about a slowdown in EV sales, it's mostly a slowdown in growth because we're still seeing a lot of deployment there. We just, or the board just approved a brand new energy efficiency and building decarbonization program from each of the public utilities in the state. So that's a major undertaking. Those new programs are going live in January the 1st. And they will offer incentives for all sorts of things, ranging from electric leaf blowers to full heat pump conversions in existing houses. Almost got 5 gigawatts of solar. It's very exciting. It's, I remember the previous milestone of 4 gigawatts. That's quite a lot of solar, actually. If average rooftop is maybe 7, 8 kilowatts. We're inching toward 1 million of those installations in the state. And the board also awarded over 1 gigawatt of solar last year in different tranches of the solar program. So we're actually making progress and expanding and accelerating the deployment of solar in the state. And we also have awarded over 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. It's going to be really hard for New Jersey to meet clean energy goals without offshore wind. That's one thing I want you to understand. Offshore wind may be a more difficult to achieve form of clean energy, but it's really important, not just because a single project has such a lot of capacity, but because when the sun doesn't shine, usually the wind blows. And that is both true diurnally and seasonally. So where are we now? Unfortunately, we do have a bunch of challenges, and Abe hinted on some of those as well. New Jersey is not a very big state, so we don't have a lot of the real estate of that we need for siting. We have some creative solutions, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And what Abe also already said, it's really hard to build things these days. All the regulations and the permitting and the NIMBYs and everything that's going on, it's really hard to build things these days. And that's true for solar, it's true for transmission, it's true for pipelines, even if you want to have things like hydrogen pipelines. And right now, we need to build things. If we want the energy transition, we need to build things. Rising energy needs, we talked a lot about that. Cost pressures, yes, there's the number of phone calls we get in the summer because people all of a sudden have higher electricity bills. Even if it's just because they turn on their air conditioning and it's so much hotter outside. It's unbelievable. It's a real problem. And for a lot of those people, those rising energy costs are a real problem. And we need to be mindful of the costs in everything we do. So building just generation is not enough. We have to invest in transmission and distribution systems. And we have to do that in a way that is not just about building poles and wires. And Mike is in the room here, and his neighbor always talks about building poles and wires at work. We have to be smart. There's technology available that helps us to expand the capacity of the grid in smarter ways than just more of the same transmission that we have had in the past. We have some very powerful vested interests that would like to keep everything the way it is right now. And of course, we have the unpredictability in the federal government. But if you look at the global landscape, it's pretty clear that the energy transition is becoming unavoidable. Now, some of those things are just pockets, right? So solar is the cheapest form of energy globally, period. Electric vehicles are already better, and globally they're already cheaper than internal combustion engines. That will happen here too. It's a matter of time, but time is important. So we have to do what we can to accelerate that transition here. And in general, the public does support the transition. Who doesn't want better cars, energy independence, jobs for Americans, and the cleaner air? Even though if people don't want to say it, but at the end of the day, nobody wants pollution in their backyard if they can avoid it. So we do have that support. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on PGM because this is something that Abe also touched upon. PGM is the transmission operator for New Jersey and other states. This is the most populous region in the US. They serve the most people in the US. It might even be the largest RTO probably in the world.
I believe so.
Yeah, probably something in China that's bigger, but this might not be an RTO. So the important thing also is that for us is that PGM oversees the energy market. So when we're talking about prices of energy and prices of capacity, that's run by PGM. Now, PGM is not subject to jurisdiction of the Board of Public Utilities because it's overarching state, so they're overseen by the federal government, and Abe mentioned the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, the FERC. They oversee PGM. We're at a somewhat of a critical juncture here, that we do need more generation, and not enough generation has been coming online. And this is a big deal because now we're seeing these effects in the capacity markets with the prices going up. But we also need to change the paradigm. So when there used to be a big coal-powered plant in one corner of a state, and there's all these lines running to consumers all over the different parts of the state, and they were all in the west and the power flows east. That all's going to change. Now we have solar in different parts of the state, more distributed. They come online in smaller chunks, but a lot more of them have to come online. So the studying process of how do we interconnect those new generators to the grid has to change and is changing. The power may come now from offshore, so it's flowing east to west instead of west to east. Now, the grid is not built for that purpose yet. So there's a lot of things that actually need to happen there. And what's perhaps even more important here is that the rules of the games are important. So what is capacity? Right? What is the ability to generate power? How do you count that when you have a whole bunch of solar that presumably all stops generating when the sun goes down? And so there's not a statistical reliability that you can apply just on each individual generator. There's a correlation that happens between the generators as well. So how do you count that? So to make sure that the grid does remain reliable. What is a virtual power plant? So I know people have heard about those things. If you have a whole bunch of solar installations at the all throughout Princeton, can you group them together and count them as one plant? That's what some of the new FERC orders look like. PGM is implementing rules to make that work. What do those virtual power plants look like? That's what PGM does as well. And who gets paid for what? Because the grid is not just about I generate a megawatt hour, somebody buys a megawatt hour. It has to be a specific location, obviously, but there's also things like frequency regulation, there's things like the capacity, there's other auxiliary services that are important for the stability of the grid, and that in some cases, solar through their inverters and battery storage also through the inverters can provide. But not always do we have mechanisms for compensating everybody for the services they can and will be able to provide. So having those rules in place in the new paradigm is going to be extremely important. And I'm taking way too much time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Just an example of what we do, very exciting. If you have already had someone talk to you about community solar, I apologize, probably the same stuff. But we are a leader in community solar. And we're so much a leader in community solar that now our model for community solar, which only allows those larger solar arrays on warehouse rooftops and contaminated sites is being exported across the region. So we see a lot more solar development of warehouses as a result of our program. So what is it? It's basically a big solar array that you can, I wouldn't say buy into, but you can pay into getting a piece of. So you have a little piece of a larger solar array. So it enables access to solar for people who cannot put solar on their own rooftops, like renters or multi-unit dwelling residents and people who have too much shade on their roofs. It's predominantly a financial construct. So if you look at the graph on the right, a subscriber pays in developer for their subscription. The developer or the solar array delivers energy to the grid. They get paid for that. And then, or no, they don't get paid for that. The subscribers get paid from the utility for the energy that is delivered on their behalf to the grid. So it's mostly a financial construct. But it works really well because it allows people to profit in the same way as they would if they have solar on their own rooftops. So we have now, as of last week, we had 167 megawatts constructed throughout the previous pilot program. That's about 25,000 households in New Jersey who get their power through community solar right now. We have another 522 megawatts in the pipeline, so 3 times as much. And that's the new program that we just opened in November this year. We also got $156 million. That is in our bank account. It's in our bank account of money from the feds to predominantly to expand our community solar program. Now, like I said, we limit community solar to building on rooftops and contaminated sites. So we have some of the most stringent siting restrictions in the country. This makes it a little bit more expensive. I have to be honest about that. But it also has unlocked this tremendous potential of warehouse rooftops for solar installation. And again, that model is being exported throughout the country right now. The community solar has to provide 51% of the capacity to low to moderate income subscribers. And in most cases, you get at least 20% discount on the price of electricity that you otherwise would have paid. What we're gonna get very soon, doesn't exist yet, is consolidated billing. What that means is that instead of getting a bill from your community solar provider and a bill from your utility, where you see the deduction, the credit you get for your community solar subscription, you're going to get one bill from your utility, and you're only going to see the discount. And if you want to sign up, there is a website. It's called Community Solar Project Finder. Just Google it. You'll find it. And that's all I had to.
Button on the front that's green. Oh, thank you, Becky. Oh.
All right, let's see. Can folks hear me?
Can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah, great. All right.
Testing.
Oh,
1, 2, 3.
there we go. Yeah. All right. My name's Christine Symington, and I'm the executive director at Sustainable Princeton. And I think I'm going to have to put this somewhere where I won't knock it off. And thank you so much to Abe Silverman and Veronique Oomen. We're very fortunate Abe is on our board, as well as a couple of members in the audience here too. David Hill, Eve Colson, if you could, let's see, if you could raise your hands and let folks know. So we're really, really excited that you're able to join us tonight. And in case the audience doesn't know, one of the things that Sustainable Princeton has been advocating for a very long time is to increase the amount of energy efficiency adoption of energy efficiency programs in our community. And I think your presentations really highlight just how important that is. You talked about one of the major reasons why electricity costs are going to go up is because we have more demand than there's going to be supply because we have restricted the amount of generation. And so what role and how important is it that we reduce demand in the electricity sector? Is that a big part of how we're going to be able to maybe, maybe not bring the cost down, but help abate some of the cost increases?
Yeah, so it's actually really important. If you look at the way those capacity auctions work and how much additional cost is added because of a couple of gigawatts of worth of generation that need to be procured, that's tremendous. It actually spikes up. So a little bit of maybe 1 or 2% reduction in demand would have significantly changed that price dynamic. So it's really important.
And I'll just say, energy efficiency is like the biggest no-brainer in the world. You replace a light bulb, and that's it, you're done. Congratulations, you've just saved energy. Go with that energy-efficient light bulb. And of course, you can get much more sophisticated, but it's nice because it's passive for the most part. And it's better. Like your house is better if you replace your windows or put in some additional insulation. And the things that Veronique is talking about with the costs really do matter. I mean, it's crazy. We are on a knife edge right now where there are folks out there saying, in order to keep the lights on, we need to go build a lot of new natural gas-fired generators across the entire region. And I mean, we either need to use less electricity or we need to build more stuff, or we're going to have to build more gas. So, it's not a great choice, not a great place to be. But that's kind of the world we live in right now. So anything we can do, and honestly, it really is over the next couple of years. It's kind of crazy how quickly this has snuck up on us. Anything we can do in the next couple of years to reduce the amount of electricity we use will pay off in spades and probably, offset the need for new natural gas.
So our motto is energy efficiency isn't boring, it's better, right? That's what we should tell folks. Yeah. All right.
Can I put a plug in for peak demand reduction? Because that's really what we're talking about, is not plugging in your EV when you come home at 5 o'clock at night, because that's the peak in demand. It's the capacity of the grid is all about when as much as how much.
Yeah.
When should we plug in?
At night. Middle of night.
Middle of night.
Also cheaper.
I'll get to questions in a second. I have a couple more that you may be wanting to ask, and sorry about that. You talked about infrastructure. You want a button that says, what is it? I love infrastructure?
Yeah, something
All
like
right.
that.
Okay. So if most people in the audience may be from Princeton, you've probably seen some infrastructure changes going on in town, and there are two types of infrastructure that people might have questions about. It's the power lines that we see around, and we know they probably are best put underground. So why can't we, or what needs to happen in order for the town to be able to, and the town, I mean broadly the town, not necessarily the municipality, to underground the utility wires. And then we've seen over the past year, PSE&G replacing natural gas lines to our buildings. And you may be thinking, well, why are we doing this? Well, we know we need to transition away from this. So can you talk a little bit about what will it take to underground power lines, and why was PSE&G upgrading our natural gas lines when we know we need to move away from it?
Those are such great questions. I'll start, and then Veronique can jump in. What it takes to underground lines is money. It is obscenely expensive to build power lines underground. 10 times more expensive. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about every penny we spend on infrastructure is being paid for by the people in this room and by the rest of the people in New Jersey. And so I think it's a very difficult conversation to have sometimes, but you need to recognize that if we spend $100 million undergrounding lines in Princeton consumers are paying that, and Trenton consumers are paying that. And so as we look at deploying relatively scarce capital resources that we have, are we better off undergrounding lines, or are we better off building another solar farm or putting it into bill relief? So it's a very complicated question, and certainly people can have just different answers to that question, but that's the trade-off we make every day. The natural gas one is a great question, and I personally, some of my research at Hopkins, we have what we call the Future of Heat Initiative, where we are looking to try to answer exactly that question. And the Board of Public Utilities is put in a very difficult place, because here we have an aging natural gas infrastructure that is leaking. It is putting out GHG, greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere. Yet at the same time, we want to shrink that system. How do you do both of those things at the same time? That is really hard, and honestly, I don't have a good answer for you. Probably long-term, what we need is we need to take people off the natural gas system, move them over to the electric grid, so that's heat pumps, and then we need to decommission parts of the natural gas grid. But that is very expensive, politically very challenging. If you have a relative who loves their gas stove, you know just how challenging that can be. And it's also very expensive. So one of the real dilemmas that we have in this sector is how much money to put into preventive maintenance today, put into fixing leak-prone pipe, that's the term of art, versus sort of trying to run the natural gas system the way it is today and sort of accept those built-in leakage emissions. This is a 20 to 30-year issue. And of course, for every customer you take off the natural gas grid, that's one customer less contributing to the cost of operating that grid. So the price for the remaining customers goes up. Very tough issue. Probably district thermal networks, where we sort of build one big geothermal well and use the existing pipeline infrastructure to distribute that out to customers is one way to do it. That's what Princeton University did, for those of you who saw that huge geothermal system they put in. But again, that's expensive and really, frankly, fairly experimental at this point. So I'd love to get your take on this as well.
Yeah, no, Abe, you said it all, and this is a big dilemma, the natural gas infrastructure and how we're going to proceed with that. So I'm not going to add a lot to that conversation. I don't think heat pumps are experimental. They do still get better. The geothermal part of it is also been used successfully for multiple decades now, I would think. But it just hasn't been deployed on a large scale very much.
Okay.
So that's the difficulty.
Batteries and battery storage. What role does battery storage have in our clean energy transition? Where are we with it?
I'll take that one. We just released a straw proposal for a new program on battery storage. There you are.
Potential bidder right there.
So battery storage is important because it facilitates renewables on the grid.
Maybe talk a little bit about like utility scale, at what scale? Like people are asking come to Stanford Princeton asking, I would like battery storage at my home. And then there's probably battery storage that's at a larger scale.
Sure. Well, so if you want to have battery storage at your home for purposes of instead of a generator, that's a great application. Now, the value to the grid at this point is relatively limited because we don't have the implementation of aggregation yet. And the aggregation is this concept of virtual power plants where different different distributed resources can group together to create a resource on the larger PJM grid. We don't have that yet. So the implementation of battery storage at your house is great for your personal usage. You can get a lot of benefit from the fact that you don't need a generator anymore. It's also, you can, if you're on the commercial side, it can be really interesting for a peak demand reduction, so you can actually save money on your bill. And then there's an application on the distributed side for generators or big loads that come online that don't want to pay for more infrastructure. So with battery, you can shave peaks on both sides, either load or generation, and you can therefore prevent some of the distribution infrastructure to have to get built. Now, on the PJM side, we see a more immediate benefit right now because this is one of the fastest ways to get capacity into the grid. So we really see that as the first priority right now, and then the distributed storage will come later when the virtual power plants and the aggregation also becomes available.
Yeah, and when you sort of look at it at the national scale, batteries are saving the bacon in California and Texas every day right now. And that is new. That is new of the last 5 or 10 years where we've actually had enough batteries deployed that it makes a difference. But these days, particularly California and Texas, where you have such high amounts of renewables coming onto the grid, the batteries store it, and then when the sun goes down, which it does every day, the batteries discharge and actually provide the energy that we need. So when we think about batteries in New Jersey, we don't have quite the renewable penetration that puts them into that category, but they are the future. And it's very exciting to think about, like, how do we actually do this at an affordable cost? Because that, of course, has to be part of it. So, one question I always like to ask audiences is, would you be okay if the price of electricity was higher during peak times and lower at night? They call this time of use pricing or variable time. Yeah, right.
Raise your hands, please.
Yeah, right. I mean, if that's you, that's great. You're part of the solution, and batteries are great for you because you can use the battery when the prices are high and charge it when the prices are low. But you know what? Most of your neighbors are not particularly interested in seeing the price of electricity vary over the course of a day. That is one of these places where the economists and the energy nerds, like a lot of us in this room, are like, yes, absolutely, let's do that. Let's have my EV feeding back to the grid. Let's have the battery feeding back to the grid when prices are high. But it really requires a sea change in the way you deal with your local utility and how you get your bill. You're gonna get an annoying text message when you're probably doing something else telling you, hey, this is a super expensive place, a super expensive time to be using electricity. Are you gonna run down and shut off your air conditioner or your washer or dryer? I don't know.
No, you have your smart house deal with that, Abe. Come on, that's why we have those expensive data centers to help us manage that.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll open questions to the audience. Kim, who's got the mic, got a question here, and back there. So
Here, because that's where I am.
I have two questions about the increase in demand. If a lot of this is coming from data centers and AI, from industries that are making a lot of money and will in the future, should the public be really paying for the cost of that increased demand? That's my first question. And then my second question is about, I saw the news that, I think it was Total Energy has just said that they're going to delay their offshore wind project in New Jersey and New York for 4 years as a way to wait out a unfriendly administration. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Ooh, two super spicy topics. So do you want to start with the offshore wind?
Yeah, I think we have confirmed at this point that the New Jersey project is not affected by that. So that's the, that was a poorly worded press release that only related to the New York project. The other question now on the data centers, that's a discussion that's going on right now. But in a energy market where supply and demand determine the price of electricity, everybody's going to pay when the prices go up. That's one of the things that that we cannot really avoid.
I totally agree with that. And you ask a great question. And I got to tell you, this is being actively discussed everywhere right now. There was a major proceeding, I guess it was the Monday before Thanksgiving, down at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, talking about how costs should be allocated to data centers. You know, and it's really interesting because data centers are kind of weird. They don't care so much about the price of electricity, strangely enough. They care about getting online super fast because they are making so much money and they're so interested in growing their share price that they will do almost anything to get electricity, including some rather goofy things. So it's kind of a situation where ultimately we need to get to the point where the data centers are contributing to the cost of expanding the grid. And they need to pay their own way. And I actually think at some level they're willing to do that. But what they're not willing to do is wait. And we're sort of at this crazy inflection point where if they were bringing, there's a term called Beyonce, bring your own clean energy. I did not come up with that. Our friend Rob Gramlich did. But you can see a world in which data centers are required to bring their own clean energy to the grid before they can get hooked up. But there is tension between the biggest companies in the world who want those data centers online now and those of us who say maybe they should wait. So we're in this kind of really interesting situation where data center load may be the thing that is the biggest single factor on affordability. And that's a real challenge. And on the offshore wind, it's, a lot of my work these days is actually working on offshore wind, and we run a multi-state collaboration that New Jersey is part of where we talk about how to get offshore wind deployed quickly. And I think one of the things to recognize is, first, a lot of our offshore wind plans were laid during the first Trump administration. So we're going to do it again during the second Trump administration. The second is, these are state laws, which are co-equal with federal government law. And so, you know, if you have a state law saying you need to do this, we will do it. And the question becomes, of course, how do you do it in a responsible manner that's affordable for customers? Not all offshore wind farms, I would say, are created equal. Those who have their permits from the federal government and have locked in their purchase orders, they're ready to go. They will be a lot less affected, we hope, in any normal administration change. They would be ready to keep going. So we should move them forward as fast as we possibly can. There's a second group that are planning for 5 to 10 years out anyway. So they're already, you know, yes, they won't get quite as much permitting done during the next 4 years as they would have normally gotten done. But their timeline is far enough into the future that they won't really be affected. And then there's this in-between group of projects that probably will, frankly, get a little bit squeezed, where they are dependent on the administration giving permits, doing analyses that, you know, we'll have to see. And of course, as with anything in the new administration, it's hard to know was he serious when he said he wanted to kill offshore wind, or is that something that's going to, wait until after we finish doing any of the other number of things that are on the agenda? And of course, it's really hard to know. But the good news is we're not powerless. And even if we get delayed in building new projects, that middle tier of projects, there's a lot of grid planning that we have to do anyway. One of the things you recognize is, it's like the old joke, right? When was the best time to plant a tree? It was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The best time to do holistic grid planning and getting ready for all these different initiatives was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So we will use the next 4 years, if it comes to it, getting the grid ready, doing the studies, doing the analysis, doing the excruciatingly boring planning that you have to do in order to make the stuff actually work so that we're ready to go on January 20th. Gosh, 2029. 28, thank you. Okay, there you go.
All right. Now, next question. Who is next? Gentleman here. Yeah.
I kind of have two questions, and one of them you've already touched on a little bit. One is the use of, we talk about building the grid out, but could that be minimized by having more distributed energy resources in a smarter grid? Along those lines, I've heard some talk of using railroad right-of-ways for transmission. So that's one concept about distributed energy. Hopefully we'll get it in grid. And the other question, I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Short answer, yes. The distributed energy will have an effect on how much of the grid do we need to build out. But it's not linear, right? Because there is a time when there is no sun and there is no wind. And what are you going to do? You still will need to deliver energy to the places that need it at that time.
To describe a little bit what distributed energy means if folks don't understand. Because if you have solar on your rooftop, you're still connected to the grid. So what do you could be specific what you mean by distributed?
I was asking about storage. They have some other. I'm a little bit of an energy nerd. So, but they talk about, the other part was demand reduction. Smart home and your battery. You have a peak. Decide, oh, I can turn this stuff off and I can grid. And I would like to see more of that, obviously. We need to somehow get some financial reward for that to make that workable.
Yes, and that's why the rules of the game are so important, right? So the landscape is changing, and aggregation of the type of resource that you talk about. Either solar on your rooftop or batteries in your house, or in some cases demand management for the capability to turn off your water heater and your air conditioning at times of peak demand. Those are all resources that with the right aggregation and the right compensation mechanisms could play a really important role in both reducing the need for the peak generation and reducing the need for transmission and distribution system upgrades. So, but those are the conversations that are happening right now in making those, determining those rules of the new system.
Yeah, and I'll just take the railroad right-of-way. Railroad right-of-ways are beautiful. They're great because you got linear infrastructure that no one wants to live next to anyway. So why not put your power lines right next to them? Same thing for highways, by the way. I mean, there are so many things that we can do to utilize and maximize the infrastructure we already have. So railroad right-of-ways are good. You do have to work with the railroads, right? And actually, it's a little bit complicated because the railroads need to have a certain amount of clearance, and they don't have that much space, and it's very difficult to do construction next to a railroad. But yeah, I mean, they are extremely valuable real estate. The other thing I'll say is the railroads realize that it's extremely valuable and will make you pay. But yes, we actually have had some projects that have considered. I don't know if we ever selected any of them, but we're actually considering using railroad right of way.
Gentleman over here.
Thank you to the panelists. We've spoken about demand response, energy efficiency, using or charging our EVs at different times of day. And that seems insufficient to me if it's not combined with utility reform in ways that we encourage our utilities to be compensated based on performance. And I would love if you can touch a little bit about performance-based metrics that are happening in our state.
Oh, this is a ringer question right there. No, there is such an interesting tension, especially when you're in government. You know you only have a few years to really make a difference. And there is this incredible tension between taking on some of the entrenched utility interests and trying to really drive reform versus trying to work with them and deploy stuff as fast as you possibly can. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. But you are absolutely right. One of the things we need to do is, traditionally utilities have been compensated, on a very simple basis. For as complicated as we make it, at the end of the day, it's really simple. The utility spends $10, they make 11. The more the spend, the more they make. And what are they incented on? They're traditionally incented on building more infrastructure and selling more electrons. And so if all of a sudden you come to them and say, hey, we as a society now want you to reduce the amount of infrastructure you're deploying, or we want you to do smarter infrastructure that's cheaper, they're like, wait, you want us to make less money? And energy efficiency is a good example of this, right? Because all of a sudden you're telling the company to sell less of its product. So you have to come through, and I think this is what you're talking about when you talk about performance-based rates. There's a lot of different terms for it. But you really have to go and say, hey, utility, we are now going to compensate you on some other metric that is actually more consistent with our societal goals. And that is a really hard thing to do. Very, very difficult. But we certainly talk about that a lot at the board.
Well, we just did some of that in Triennium 2, right, with the energy efficiency.
What is Triennium 2?
The new energy efficiency programs that the board approved for all the utilities, in that they need to hit certain energy efficiency goals, and if they don't hit those, they're going to get a reduction in the level of return they can make on their investment.
And this is an elections have consequences kind of moment, because when I joined the board, we were just coming out of the Christie administration. I was there a little bit before Veronique was, and the energy efficiency program was a bit of a disaster, frankly. And yet, so we had a new group of people come in, and it's taken, 4 years to get that program really up and launched, because it was a fundamental reform where we started paying the utilities to deliver the energy efficiency services. That was hard. And these two people right here are the people who did that. So, it's just a good example of the kind of fundamental reform that you need to do. And you kind of do need to bring the utilities along with you, because if you're fighting with your utility, then they're probably not doing what you want them to do. And it's been very interesting. There's a very progressive commissioner, chairwoman, Melissa Gilbert, who took over in Connecticut. So this is not a New Jersey story. But she came in and she really started socking it to the utilities. And you know what they did? They basically started working to the rule and going on strike. And it has been a mess, to the extent where the governor had to come in and, start mediating the dispute. So it's this, you can't say this, I can. It's a very tough situation, because you really do, at the end of the day, want results. And that means making compromises with very powerful political interests. But you got to do it, right? And that's sort of the art of, you want to push them as far as you can without getting them to the breaking point.
There was a hand, the student right there, then, and then back there. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So my question is, was all the good effort being, onto the green energy production, the electricity prices have been rising throughout the years, from 2017 to 2024. Right. So, why should I support, as a mass public, why should I support the green energy production instead of doubling down on the fossil fuel, conventional energy? Now, after all, right, we don't know.
If you
Right.
put
So
that, yeah, thank
after
you.
all, we don't know whether the climate change is caused by us, caused by the carbon emission, and all that stuff, right?
Well, that's, yeah, I think, you know, if you look at the vast majority of the scientists out there, they'll tell you that climate change is in fact driven by humans, and I think that's probably right. You know, the question though of how do you measure how do you think about using fossil fuels versus clean energy? It's a really good question, and one we spend a lot of time on, because there's job implications, there's labor implications, and there's cost implications. And, you know, at some level, if you ignore climate damage and you don't worry about the public health impacts, generally keeping with the same fossil fuel system we have today is less expensive. But then you start thinking about adding in all the health impacts and the climate impacts, and you start adding that to the fossil fuel system, it starts to look really, really expensive. And the good news is, even when you ignore all the climate damages and the public health impacts, we are getting to the point, not necessarily in New Jersey, because for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, but there are parts of the country and large parts of the world where solar and wind are actually cheaper than building new fossil. And, you know, that is, if I have hope out of all this, it's that whatever government regulation and incentives and policies, whatever impact that has, it ultimately gets dwarfed by the market. And if we have consumer demand for clean energy, and clean energy is coming in ultimately cheaper in a lot of parts of the world, then that's the direction we're going to go. And it's going to be all about the money, and that's fine. I want investors in clean energy to make money. You know, that said, I mean, the fossil industry is a very powerful industry, and it employs a lot of people. So we have to manage that transition as well, and we are just not at the point where we have the infrastructure, even if we wanted to shut down all those power plants tomorrow. It's got to be the next 10 years, and it's got to be, you know, running as fast as we can every year for the next 10 years to get the grid ready, to get the investment climate ready, to get the regulation ready so that we can make that transition.
Last question, a gentleman over there from the audience. And Alan, do we have any questions that came in online? No? Okay, great.
Yeah, my question is, I understand that the public has really bought into the transition to clean energy, but on the other hand, there are really powerful interests. That tells me there's really some hard negotiation that needs to take place. I wanted to find out from you, how are the conversations going? I mean, how is the public's interest being channeled to the powerful interests? You know, how often are they having these conversations? What should we expect next, especially given that we have really ambitious goals to accomplish?
That's a difficult question to answer, actually, because conversations are happening every day, right? There are open proceedings. So anytime government takes an action, there is an opportunity for the public to provide input in multiple ways. We have open public meetings, there's written comment periods, and a lot of times the interests that you're talking about, they will be the first ones to submit public comments, and they have lawyers on their teams writing the comments for them, and they will make very detailed recommendations that they will lobby for in different parts of government as well. At the same time, there's also interest groups from the environmentalists, from the labor organizations, from the clean energy companies, and they have similar instruments to make their opinions known. And we have a ratepayer advocate who is always part of the proceeding, who always submits comments on behalf of all ratepayers in New Jersey. So those conversations are happening every day, and everybody has the opportunity to participate. But it's no secret that the parties with more resources have an easier time to participate in those conversations as well.
Yeah, and
Sorry, ratepayers, that's us.
Yeah, ratepayers is everybody.
Everybody pays a utility bill. Ratepayers are us. Okay.
No, I think the same. I was one of those. I was one of those people who wrote those comments, including for NRG. And one of the things that I appreciate is, I'm actually a capitalist at heart, and I want to make it worthwhile for investors to invest in clean energy. We need to make it profitable for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so, I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is tremendous sources of capital. Places like BlackRock, definitely socially conscious investing if you've ever seen it. No, they are coming in and they are major investors in clean energy. And, and that's good. We need that capital to come into these markets. And so whatever we can do to make it attractive so that the returns for investors in clean energy are at least as good on a risk-adjusted basis as for the fossil. And, we're not quite there yet. And I will say there is a lot of debate, particularly when you sort of talk nationally and internationally about how close are we to an energy transition? How serious are we about these climate targets? And you see this with the oil majors who occasionally will go into a foray where, they will go and invest in offshore wind, and then they will pull back. Why are they doing that? You could say it's for greenwashing. Maybe. I think they're in it to make money. And where the system is set up for them to make money, they will put their capital. And it's a lot of the same people with the same expertise. I actually don't think clean energy companies are any more trustworthy than the fossil companies. They're just better marketing, right? They're in it because it's for the money. Plenty of people feel strongly about climate change as well, and they like that piece of it too. But if it doesn't pencil, they're not going to do it. And so we just need to be very clear-eyed about why companies do things. And we need to set up the system. And back to your point about performance-based rate making, we need to set up the system in a way that incents that capital to come in and do more of the things we want it to do and less of the things we don't.
All right. Well, we are at 8:30. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much, Veronique and Abe. Before you leave, please take a moment to check the table in the back. Alex mentioned that there's information about energy efficiency programs, about community solar. She mentioned we have 2 great events coming up in 2025 that are scheduled so far. We will have so many more. Our Sustainable Home Expo, where you can talk to people who actually provide energy efficiency programs, electric vehicle charging, sustainable landscaping, solar, rooftop solar. And we'll have our 3rd greenhouse tour in the fall of next year, where you can talk to homeowners in Princeton who have implemented some really cutting edge and also very boring but very clean energy efficiency and renewable energy in their homes. So please step by the table to learn more about that. So thanks again to the library. The library does close at 9 o'clock. They're going to start trying to kick us out in about 15 minutes. If you parked and need to get your parking ticket validated, you can do that. And you have to have a library card. Sorry, yes, you have to have a library card. But thank you so much again. Please give our speakers a round of applause.